All right. So, the next Alien book, it's depends on what website you look at as to which one came after into Cadras in publication order. Some say it's Aliens Infiltrator, while others say it's this Alien 3, the unproduced first draft screenplay by William Gibson, a novel by Hugo Award winning author Pat Cadigan. I'm not laughing because of her award. She deserves it. She's a very good author. Um, Laughing because that is pretty much the title of this book. What is William Gibson's Alien 3? What it is it's an early script for what Alien 3 would be. There were many scripts for Alien 3, and the stories kind of contradict one another, but William Gibson's is the popular one because I think most people find it fascinating. There are two drafts of this, and for the longest time, you could read the first draft online. It was the easier one to access, with the second one not being as hard. Not It's kind of being hard to find until Dark Horse adapted it into a comic series, and then later Audible would come along and develop an audio drama, bringing back Lance Henriksen and Michael Biehn. Well, then the second draft script became easier to get a hold of, and the first draft kind of disappeared. So this novelization was created based off of the first draft, and there are some differences between the two. But I'm not here to compare drafts necessarily. I'm here to talk about this novelization by Pat Cadigan. So what is this version of Alien 3 about? Well, it's about an arms race, basically, that goes horribly wrong for both sides. William Gibson's Alien 3 opens with the Sulaco has been in space for a number of years, about 3 years, when Bishop notices in cryostasis that something's wrong with the Sulaco. And that when he was ripped in half, the queen either laid and left some sort of tissue inside him that gestated into a face hugger egg. And also, there are other Xenos on the spacecraft. This isn't explained very well in any version of this script. None of them explain this very well. It is like the one thing that is not explained well in what we got for Alien 3 as to how Xenos got on there. Because in that, there's two face huggers eggs were laid while the queen was hiding in the drop ship. So yeah, it's not really explained well. It's never explained well. It's a plot hole in every version of William Gibson's Alien 3. And there's only so much you can do as an author to fix that. So the Sulaco strays into territory run by the Union of Progressive Peoples, which is the Soviet Union in space. And they are very anti-Weyland-Yutani in the I'm assuming the United Americas, although they don't really refer to them as that. They refer to them as the capitalists. Well, the UPP dispatches a ship that intercepts the Sulaco. They board. They end up getting samples of the xenomorph, biomatter, and they're going to develop a biological weapon, because they claim that Weyland-Yutani has broken their peace treaty and is creating a bioweapon to use against them. So they take Bishop's front half, his top half, and they go over his recordings and stuff of what happened at Hadley's Hope, and essentially what the xenomorph is, and then they proceed to try to clone it. Meanwhile, the Sulaco ends up docking at this station that's on the outskirts of like the Americas space, and when a boarding party goes on, there is a xenomorph. And the xenomorph, in the firefight that precedes, Ripley's cryopod is damaged, putting Ripley into a coma. Then we get into the main plot, which is this is a Hicks and Bishop story. Hicks is woken up. He doesn't know what's going on. Newt runs into his room because she's freaking out because Ripley is disappeared. And what proceeds to happen is that there are two Weyland-Yutani execs that show up that they take biosamples. They ship some off with the ship that ends up taking Newt because it's about a third of the way in. Newt is sent away to live with her grandparents on Earth. So Newt's out of the story. Now you might be wondering, why are Ripley and Newt being written off? Well, first of all, there was a school of thought when writing multiple of the early scripts for Alien 3 that Sigourney Weaver wasn't going to come back. In fact, the only reason she seems to have come back to do Alien 3 was to kill the Ripley character off. Which ended up not being a thing because Alien Resurrection, but we won't get there. There's no point talking about that right now. And Newt, even though this was 1987, she was a little girl, and, little girls grow up, and they grow very quickly. So, Alien 3 ended up in development hell, and they didn't even go with this script. So, allegedly she's in cryostasis, and she suddenly grew up like she's Lion-O? I think not. That's going to be goofy and, like, weirdly convenient for script purposes, or you recast her, I guess. I don't know how you approach that. So, Newt's involvement in this, although she has more involvement than Ripley does, it's very minimal. And it's Hicks, because, like, ultimately what it comes down to is Alien and Aliens is Ripley's character arc is done, essentially. That's one of the problems with Alien 3. I mean, she's dealing with everyone around her dies, right? And that's like the whole thing of the movie. And coming to grips with the fact that she's going to die too. And it's just a miserable thing. But that wasn't necessary. Her whole motherhood arc is done with Aliens. And James Cameron's not going to come back to do a sequel to his film. That was pretty clear at this point. Like, he had no desire to do that. He moved on to do The Abyss. And so, what's the logical thing? Oh, we're going to make an action hero out of Michael Biehn, who's this up-and-coming star. And I feel bad for Michael Biehn. Not to get into the weeds here, but he got a raw deal with Aliens and Terminator where he was not paid very well. So he was kind of banking on the third Alien movie. He was going to make some money off of it. And when that didn't come to be, and then they went with the script they did, and his agent found out that he was going to get killed, it led to a whole lawsuit. And that's why that's why Hicks's body's all mangled in the beginning of Alien 3, and you don't really see it in the theatrical cut. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate how that played out. So, I gotta get into the weird stuff of this. So, the cloning goes wrong for both the UPP and Weyland-Yutani, and people are exposed to this biomatter, and we find a new form of xenomorph. In the second draft, it's made clear that they're really different looking, and they went with an old idea, a discarded look for the xenomorph that came from the original Alien, with seeing a skull inside the xenomorph's domed head. But in this, we get, because they cloned it, Pat, in my opinion, Pat Cadigan infers that the cloning process didn't work properly for either faction, and thus you get weird things like xenomorphs growing inside a person's whole body and they explode. That's a thing that happens in this. Um, they facehuggers can gestate multiple aliens, kind of like how the Predalien does in Alien versus Predator Requiem. There's there's a spore element in this that like the queen can spit like a spore that makes you, that's why you get the explosion variant of like a full grown xenomorph like blows up inside you. um there's a whole segment with xenomorphs getting a hold of some like other primates, and we have like a variant of the xenomorph from there, which kind of sort of got adapted into the film version of Alien 3 with the dog alien slash yak alien. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of like weird body horror with that. It's a pretty nasty book in that regard. But what really I think makes this version stand out over the comic adaptation and the audio drama is Hicks's PTSD angle, where he's like, he had this platoon he was part of, and they're all dead, and he keeps envisioning them, and he gets like the 1,000-yard stare. A lot of it, unfortunately, is direct scenes from Aliens, which is done a little too frequently. But as the book goes on, we get more scenes that are like the Pat Cadigan makes up that are in character for those characters to say. A lot of Hudson stuff, a lot of Apone stuff, even Vasquez, and like some of the smaller characters that were part of the platoon, like Drake and like others like him, and that's where this book really shines. Also, alternative action sequences compared to any of the other versions that I've read or listened to. There's a whole climax of the book. Part of it takes place in out on the side of the space station, which is a cool scene, which is very reminiscent to the beginning of Alien's Nightmare Asylum. In fact, I honestly think, in hindsight, because Mark Virden was very limited on what he could and couldn't write when it came to the first arc of his Aliens trilogy of comics. I think 20th Century Fox was kind of banking on everyone agreeing on William Gibson's first draft, because this is left open for a sequel, and the Outbreak slash Earth Hive storyline would have fit kind of okay in that, but it was not to be, and that's kind of frustrating. So this book really, it's interesting as like a what if book, and in that regard it's also bittersweet, because I think this is better than what we actually got from Alien 3, because Alien 3, although it's a movie about human misery and the end of things and the pain of loss, ultimately just about every character, although there's some very good acting in it, everyone's kind of unlikable, and Ripley's just miserable. We barely get any Bishop, and it just ends on a downer. It's a downer of a movie, and everyone hated it at the time. I mean, now we got fans of it because we've had so far worse Alien movies from Resurrection onwards. Pretty much all of them have been various degrees of bad. I think Romulus is probably the closest we've gotten to something that's half decent. But then again, I probably put it on par with Resurrection, where like there's some interesting sequences in both, but overall they're not very good. And like Alien 3 is just this weird, it's like a white whale for 20th Century Fox. And it ultimately it's their fault this ended up so messed up. I mean, they cut a teaser trailer without having a decided script. Um, if you all remember, on Earth, everyone can hear you scream. None of these versions that I have ever come across, and no, not a single Alien 3 script, and I did a lot of research. There were a lot of them. I didn't come across a single one that actually took place, the majority of it, on Earth. I think they went off of the like Earth Hive storyline and said this is going to be the next movie, and it wasn't, and it wasn't feasible really to be the next movie at that time, and they just screwed themselves over, and they screwed everyone else over, and kind of they just ruined their own franchise. It's just unfortunate. But I should talk about the fact that this it does leave it open for a sequel. Even though there's a lot of carnage and they kill off pretty much every new character in this, um, I wonder if there was an intent to make like another Alien story based off of a different script and adapt it to make it a sequel to William Gibson's Alien 3. Because it ends with like a philosophical question that Bishop has. Because Bishop goes through like this whole thing of discovery and almost sentience in a lot of ways, where he's like, he can't harm a human being, but what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? Because we have these super xenomorphs that are basically spread by spores and like gestate multiple ones into multiple xenos in a single host. Like what do I do? Do I protect these people here on this space station, or do I sacrifice them to save the greater good of the people of Earth? And that's a really interesting conundrum because despite that, Bishop, once he's brought back from the UPP, with his new not so great legs, which is a whole legs arc with this. Once he's brought back, he kind of does similar things to what he did in Aliens, which really seems like a first draft thing and would have been changed later if there had been like several more drafts. I have a feeling William Gibson would have changed and done something a little more profound with Bishop because the roots were there. And the whole idea of Bishop and Hicks are teaming up because they have to kill all these xenomorphs. There can't be any that make it back to Gateway. That's a fun, tense thing, and not everyone's on board with it. And it's cool. It's a cool, different enough plot from Alien and Aliens that it could have stood out on its own. Do I think this is as good as Alien and Aliens? No, not even. It's a bit schlocky. It deals a lot with like the body horror aspects and being gross. It leans a little heavily into that, which is honestly, I have to look at this objectively, and I have to be a little hard on this because this was, I'll be honest, after Into Cadres, this is one of the greatest things I've ever read because that book is so awful. And a lot of the Titan books have been various states of mediocre to hot steaming feces. So like this is a diamond in the rough. Like with Phalanx, but like I can't put it on par with Phalanx because it's really suffers from third movie syndrome. It has enough good ideas with it that I think having several more films and possibly with what is revealed at the end of this, which I will not spoil, it would be really interesting to see like at least another 3 Alien movies that followed this, because like they realized at this point that Alien wasn't a one-off movie. You could make something different with it with Aliens, and this was just like, okay, here's the sequel to Aliens. We can go off and do bigger, grander things after this. And unfortunately, that didn't come to fruition. Instead, we got a dark comedy, 2 terrible team-up films, 2 weirdly, well, I mean, like one black goo film that's just body horror and lofty ideas for some reason, and a movie where Michael Fassbender makes out with Michael Fassbender, and that's the only good thing that happened in the movie. And then a movie that references all the other movies in like a terrible Chat GPT way. If you were to tell me Romulus was written in Chat GPT, I genuinely would believe it at this point. Anyway, how many stars would I give this book? Because I think it's worth reading. Even if you aren't a fan of the Alien books, you're a fan of Aliens, I recommend picking this up. Like, it's a fun read. And it's fun. It's action-packed. It's never boring. I give it a 4 out of 5. It's worth your time to check out. Highly recommend it. I do have a caveat. So, this is pretty much the only Titan Books Alien book to not have an official audiobook release. Well, there was one, and it was really limited, and it got pulled from Audible. I don't know what happened. I never saw it, but I was doing research on this. If you want to just listen to this audiobook, there is an AI audiobook done by Patrick Predator, and he does a lot of like the classic Predator novels and Alien novels and puts them in unabridged audiobooks. And he did one for this. It's not bad. It's a little jarring. Like how a lot of the AI audiobooks are. We can't all be YJK audiobooks. They seem to be the gold standard for these. But I wouldn't put it as far down as like Hidden Gems early AI audiobooks are. Like comparing this, because I listened to this. I read and listened to it. Same thing I did with True Colors, and True Colors was the Hidden Gems book. True Colors, when listening to, was a little more rough on the ears than this, but certain punctuation in that Patrick Predator audiobook, little jarring if you're not reading it while listening to it. But you get the hang of it after a while. You kind of adapt in after about an hour in. Especially when it comes to dialogue. But, I listen to a lot of, like, the AI audiobooks these days because, I review so much that, like, I don't have a problem with it. I've actually heard worse audiobooks from actual human beings, so, it is what it is. But yeah, 4 out of 5. Check it out. There's a reason Pat Cadigan is the, like well regarded as an author. Unlike with, like, some of these other authors that get awards, I think, simply by diversity credits, she genuinely earns it. What she adds to this and fleshes out throughout from the screenplay, I think is superb. And she fills in several of the plot holes. Not all of them, but like most of them. And I think that that's incredibly admirable. So, anyway, have a nice day.